come back to life!
It can be frustrating coming to terms with the fact that it's becoming harder and harder for classics to be left alone. Back in the early 2000s, Fooly Cooley's run could best be described as an artistic anomaly, and even though it might have left a trail of ambitious destruction in its wake with very little explanation as to why, the mark it left on our impressionable community is undeniable. In fact, many would argue Fooly Cooley only worked as well as it did due to its brevity, and that continuing the series would be counterintuitive to Kazuya Tsurumaki's initial goal to break the rules of anime by making something short but dense-packed. So while the Pillows are once again back with their unapologetic rock distortions, how could Production IG possibly recapture that same feeling in a sequel? How do you continue something that was supposed to be fleeting? Well, despite being shown very little, it's tough to deny that the first trailer for the new installments is doing everything in its power to recreate the original flavor of the series from a technical level. And while some of this can naturally be chalked up to Tsurumaki returning to supervise the production, it's possible that the trailer's look can be traced back to a man whose name isn't even shown on the staff list. Shingo Natsumi is a very experienced animator who's best known as the director of One Punch Man. And while many were quick to attribute the show's dynamically explosive animation quality to an increased budget, Natsumi makes it clear that the key to a successful product is making sure you have extremely passionate people on board whose concerns go well beyond money. With so many shows coming out each season, a lot of us are quick to forget how industry connections are interwoven, and sometimes it's that yearning for creative celebration that leads to the most memorable results. So by that logic, it's no wonder that a lot of the animation staff for One Punch Man were also present for Natsumi's previous work, Space Dandy, as he probably saw them as comrades that could continue working towards a common goal. And while One Punch Man was what the mainstream had been more exposed to, it's worth bringing up Dandy as it's probably closer than the former to what FLCL represents as a work of animation. Both of which were very much passion projects for creators to strut their stuff, extenuating the unique power and diversity of Japanese animation with no clear discerning message in sight.
Going with the flow is where it's at. And that's the dandy way to live.
So while Natsumi himself doesn't seem directly involved, if there was anybody in the industry to trust with a project like this, it would be those who share the same creative mindset. These include Kiyotaka Oshiyama as mechanical designer, while Chikashi Kubota is trusted with the new character designs. The former was previously credited as an animator, writer, and episode director on Space Dandy, while you could trace the latter's history with Natsumi all the way back to his Gurren Lagann days. The fact that these two aren't Production IG regulars shows that consideration was taken to get the most appropriate artists for the job, right down to giving almost every episode its own unique director with their own style, much like how Studio Bones set the foundation for Space Dandy's identity. Even the presidents of both studios acknowledge how openly collaborative this project feels. That being said, there could still be room for concern. It's hard to call myself a fan of Katsuyuki Motohiro as a chief director. While it is true that he did help create one of my favorite anime of all time with Psycho Pass, it was his experience in live action that left its mark on the series, as it tried to emulate the gritty realism of a street-level crime drama. And while I'm thankful he seems to show a steady interest in becoming more involved with animation, his current expertise alongside his lack of experience could be seen as totally incongruous with the type of storytelling that this franchise would need to stay authentic. Fooly Cooley wasn't limited to trying to mimic any real-world actions, and managed to get away with doing things only Japanese animation could, pushing itself to go where neither feature film nor TV productions would go. But then again, maybe what he's bringing to the table will be more along the lines of what he did with Adam the Beginning, a show that could not be more different than Psycho Pass and had a much more exaggerated feel to it. Meanwhile, Hideto Iwai's involvement as screenwriter is more concerning, because while Motohiro at least has experience with anime production, this guy has none, with his actual background being that of a playwright and stage actor. So while the visuals and music are very reminiscent to the original OVA, Yoji Inakito's signature writing style will inevitably be missing. In the Blu-ray commentary for Fooly Cooley, Tsurumaki said Enokido is best known for his sexual imagery and thematic conceits, which can be felt in other shows like Revolutionary Girl Utena and perhaps to a lesser extent or on High School Host Club. But while this could mean that the sequel will be much less sex-oriented, there are many different layers to approaching the broad thematic scope of adolescence outside of a person's sexual growth. To this day, I still remember being exposed to FLCL when it aired on Adult Swim over a decade ago, and even though I had no idea what the hell was going on, there was something intimate about the trials and tribulations presented on screen, enough to make me feel like I just needed to keep watching. During that sensitive time where we're all trying to figure out who we are and where our places are in the world, our concept of normal becomes very malleable. Fooly Cooly is a very human story, assuring us that through all the explosions, innuendos, and pop cultural references, we have the potential to make it out okay. Surprisingly, it was one of the first cartoons that didn't make me afraid of going out into a world that seems as nonsensical as the show itself.
You can't be real.
Come to think of it, most of EY's works do revolve around his time as a hikikomori, where those feelings of isolation can be their most damaging. Yet nowadays, not only does he seem happy he overcame those hard transition points in his life, but he even seems to acknowledge how necessary they can be for shaping who we are. I think it's that intimacy with his past that made his production so successful, and honestly, it might even explain why he was specifically sought out for a project like Fooly Cooly. In an interview with the Japan Times, Iwai even states, "I was terrified to see people and the real world then, but now understand that the real world is not so scary, and that it's much more terrifying to live in a room with your own delusions, because there, the delusions are limitless, and you can fall into a kind of fantasy forever. I learned the power of terror from my experiences of such fantasies, and now I'm making theater using and playing to humans' fantastical imagination." There's a lot of truth to what he says. Whenever we're confronted with outside pressures, our first instinct is to withdraw, to hide within one's own self and just watch the world burn around us. For such a zany and energized miniseries, it's easy to forget that a lot of its characters like Naota, Mamimi, and Ninamori all isolated themselves in an attempt to avoid their problems, only for them to realize that when you try to keep everything inside, you're only prolonging the inevitable. And part of growing up is realizing that.
I wished that it would go away. But it's useless. Even if it burns down, the wreckage and ash are still there.
It's that uncertainty towards life that helps define its most important moments, and in a lot of ways, Fooly Cooly is no different. I don't think anyone truly knew what to expect the first time they were exposed to something like this, whether it was back when it first came out or even today. And maybe that's the point. I know a lot of this can just be boiled down to pointless semantics, and what we get could be an insult to what came before. The unknown can be scary, shocking, and unsurprisingly stupid, but it can also be exciting. No matter what I say, the decision comes down to you, but personally, I think there's a lot to look forward to given what we've seen so far. As for whether or not these new seasons will have anything more to say when they finally come, well, we'll just have to wait and see.